this is extraordinary here, Salma. I mean, Angela Rayner, she's the Deputy Prime Minister. We have to stop and think about that. She's, the second most important person in the Labour Party. A real important figure. She's your deputy chairman as well, I think, and that's
deputy
voted.
Leader of the Labour Party.
And she a lot of supporters will be big supporters of her. But this is not great, is it? I mean, in the end, it doesn't matter in a way what the legal situation is, what the advice situation is. People at home now will be going. They've made their minds up. A lot of them. It's public perception that counts, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Well, yes and no. So, yes, in politics, public perception is everything, and you can definitely, in the rough and tumble and toxicity of politics, you can be caught up with the fact that something doesn't look great and it doesn't smell right. And that, we haven't seen the report yet from the PM's ethics advisor. We have had commentary from her lawyers who said they didn't advise her on tax, so it's not looking great. And the more you look into the story, the more difficult it is for Angela Rayner.
Particularly as she's somebody who shouted quite a lot about things not looking good and smelling right.
Indeed. And she criticised, rightly, in a lot of instances, criticised the Conservative government ministers for similar issues around taxation. But the question then is this hypocrisy? What did she know? Was she advised well, or did she not take the advice? Is it that actually the rules around it are so complex that even the Deputy Prime Minister doesn't understand it? There are so many questions that come out of it. But ultimately, the thing that worries me is that it's just a question of trust, which is politicians will go out and do whatever they want anyway. And that the fact it's so broken that it doesn't matter what you say or whatever excuses are offered, it's just going to be dismissed.
I mean, that presumably would be front and centre of the Prime Minister's mind. But just on the new information this morning, that a key part of what she used to explain how she got herself into, I think, what most softly you can call a pickle, the very least, was the fact that she had taken the advice. And she mentioned these convincing firm who've now come out and said they didn't advise her. One thing to say is that there is a very specific term, isn't there, Caroline, in law about what advice, in inverted commas, is. They're not, I don't think they're in a position to give tax legal advice. So they could well be saying that because they shouldn't be giving advice. Whether she, as a person who isn't a tax lawyer, took it as advice is also a factor, isn't it?
I think it is a factor, and that's why the outcome of the independent sort of investigation underway is really important in all of this. I think, what is really important here as well is recognise this thing about the trust fund situation. There's lots of very rich people in this country, and there's a few on the Tory benches over the years I've seen who have trust funds to do all sorts of things in terms of their assets and money.
But that's not illegal. You can set up a trust to pass to your children, and that's one of the problems, I think, that people will be looking at this and think, well, I've tried to look into this and couldn't do it for my children, and you've somehow managed to do it for yours. We know she has very specific circumstances, but, that's not illegal to manage your tax beneficially,
it's not illegal, but I have to say she's had the full wrath of some quarters of the media going for this, as if she's living it large. That trust fund was set up because of her, and I didn't realise this, I don't think most of the country realised this, because her child, when he was born, suffered actions that led to his disability and an award was made. So her and her ex-husband, now ex-husband, tried to do what they could to put that award into a trust. Now,
having said that, challenging.
Yes, I agree.
Set up a trust. They're challenging whether. Sorry, Caroline, but I just think it's important to say that because we perhaps.
I just felt it was important to say that because I think her intentions with her ex-husband were absolutely admirable to protect a child. However,
but that's not what she's been criticised for.
Having come out and said, I sought advice, I was told this was OK, the problem is they will be looking in this investigation as well, did she really seek advice? What information did she give to the conveyancing firm that were just handling the mortgage and what have you? And if it's found that she didn't do enough or she didn't supply information necessary to make sure, she could have gone to HMRC, she could have gone to someone in the Cabinet Office, then Keir Starmer, if the investigation says that didn't happen, he is in a difficult place not to take action.
You know, here's the thing. I mean, not long ago, I think last time I was on the show, we were talking about Rushanara Ali, who stepped down. She resigned. Now, technically, she didn't do anything wrong. She didn't break any laws, but it was perception of how it looked.
Of course.
Tenants left her property, and then she put the house on the market. The house didn't sell. She puts it back on the market and puts the rent rise up.
Yep. That is against New Labour practice,
well, it's against a new policy, but at the time, she hasn't broken any...
Well, at the time, she had.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's...
She was the Minister for Homelessness.
The thing is, and that looks bad because she's the homeless minister.
Yeah.
What with Angela Rayner is the housing minister.
Right. Yeah.
This is her portfolio. I mean, even if she's back, you've got to move her from that position because there's going to be some tough decisions. I mean, there might be property taxes coming up. There might be changes in stamp duty. This is going to hang over her for a long time to come.
Well, quite. But this is the point on hypocrisy. And, Caroline, I totally take your point about her as a human being wanting to make the right choices for her child. And everybody watching today who is a parent is going to feel the exact same way. We want to make the right choices for our children. The question is, do you have the power to be able to do that? Can you influence that? Angela Rayner is in a position where she can. And if you don't have lawmakers abiding by the law, or in instances, even if they didn't mean to become lawbreakers, then how do you trust them? This is a question of hypocrisy, it's a question of trust, and it's a question of whether a Labour government that's having one of the worst starts to a government in a really difficult situation can bring this back. And it's not just that. It's the idea that it smacks of this kind of elitism that is, you know, Lord Ali's going to pay for your glasses and your trips to New York and, you know, you can just sweep something under the carpet because you happen to be powerful. I'm not saying that this is the intention. I'm saying you've got to be so much more careful in public life. And you know this yourself.
Of course I know this. Of course I know this. And that's why... You know, if the investigation finds that actually her statements about seeking advice and do what she is a deputy prime minister, she is in the cabinet, she should know in these circumstances, complicated though they are, you have to go to the nth degree to make sure you're on safe ground.
It is the biggest problem because everyone has said that, you know, if Starmer was to step down at some point, which could be highly likely, it's a long way to go, that Angela Rayner was one of the obvious replacements. Is the problem for Keir Starmer is that if he sacks her as minister, she could be more trouble on the backbenches and you could really get a severe split in the Labour Party. That is at the top of his mind, isn't it? It's going to have to be a strategy decision, isn't it?
I don't think that will be at the top of his mind, Adela. I think at the top of his mind...
Really?
No, I don't think that. I mean, Angela is talked up as a potential successor to Keir Starmer should, you know, he step down or what have you. But do you know what? So many people are talked up about being the next leader of a party and the next Prime Minister. 9 times out of 10, it doesn't actually happen. I think what's uppermost in his mind is, you know, someone who has potentially here made a massive mistake. Whether that was intentional or just a daft judgment call, it doesn't really matter. And Salma's right about that. It is the optics about this and taking responsibility. And if you have, as Angela has, called out, quite rightly in my view, others for how they've behaved, you can't expect any less hostility when you are seen to not have made the mistake yourself.
The other explosive...
I was going to say, the biggest news to come out of Birmingham in a long time. This is coming out of Birmingham today.
Oh, you're going...
ever since the opening of the Bull Ring, that Nadine Dorries is coming back into politics and she's going to be making an opening speech at the Reform UK conference in Birmingham.
Surprise, surprise!
And that's incredible. Did you see that coming, Salma?
Well, I've got to tell you, my first job in politics was as Nadine Dorries' intern.
Oh,
wow!
So this is like very full. This is very. I loved it. I loved it, and
So you're responsible for her,
it's
right?
my fault, everyone.
No, I didn't say fault.
I actually have a huge fondness for Nadine. I don't share her politics, but I have a lot of fondness for her as a person, and I know that lots of critics of hers out there. And you know what? Fine, she's made a decision. She's been critical of the Conservative Party for a long time. She was critical of David Cameron. She was critical of Theresa May. She was a great fan of Boris Johnson's, as you see in the scenes there, that she was given ministerial posts under his tenure. And she talks about it. You know, her defection is about the fact that we committed patricide and got rid of Boris Johnson.
I was going to, should we just see, because she's spoken to the Daily Mail. 2 things, I think. One, what it says about the Conservative Party and its day. Also, she's not... I mean, one of her big babies, Salma, you may well have worked on it back in the day, was the online safety bill. And, of course, Nigel Farage, I think, has used the word dystopian about that and is very against it. So this is not a sort of like-minded ideologies completely, is it? Is it partly to do with her saying that the Tory party's finished, really?
I think it's interesting that, as well, is that she's obviously a big super fan and supporter of Boris Johnson.
Well, quite.
Does it indicate that there's no comeback for Boris? And she's thinking, well, do you know what? There's no chance he's going to have a comeback, so this is where I jump ship.
Well, no comeback to the Tory party. But what do we think? Is there a question there about whether Boris Johnson, who I don't think has given up ever being a leader of a party, could we imagine him joining Reform?
Oh, no. Can you imagine Farage and Johnson?
Can't wait
Is there enough room in that, tent of oxygen?
Exactly, between Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson fighting over the leadership of the party. Look, if I was being very cynical, it might be that Boris Johnson hasn't given up his desire to lead the Conservative Party, and it might be that, a few of his supporters are going over for a future merging of the two parties at some point.
There's a lot of Conservative MPs out of work.
Yes, and
former Conservative MPs out of work.
They may well want to join Reform. But, we have people defecting from parties all the time. In recent history, we had loads of Labour and Tory MPs over Brexit joining and forming an ill-fated third party.
I think what is significant about the Reform conference, it's obviously starting today. First of all, the fact that Nadine resigned, became public yesterday evening, was giving them headlines today. Farage will be speaking today. That will give them another probably front page splash tomorrow. And, of course, it's not just Nadine. We've had Jake Berry and others. David Jones, who was the, I think, Secretary of State for Wales. Jake Berry, who's a former, I think, vice chairman of the party. They have all moved to Reform. In 2021, I think a couple of hundred tickets were sold for the Reform conference. We're talking about thousands now.
Birmingham NEC,
it's a very different
It's
situation.
a huge place, 12,000.
Yeah. And they will be delighted with this media coverage. But, I mean, the other thing Nadine doesn't, hide away from, she was really cheesed off about not getting a peerage, and maybe some people in the Tory party ranks should have maybe thought about that a few years ago.
Just on that 12,000 figure, I looked at, they did this big sort of operation sort of launch thing at Reform UK on YouTube. I looked at the YouTube channel, and it's been up there 8 days, only 34,000 views. So you sort of wonder, what is the true picture here? Should that be more? I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think this is interesting, which is we're all talking about Reform in a particular way because it's this sort of great story of what was essentially a joke party 30 years ago, and that persistence and that consistency paying off and people actually sitting up and paying attention to what was a protest party. But you could say that equally about the Green Party or the Lib Dems, and they might not have the same level of electoral success. They don't get the same level of media coverage.
You don't hear talk of people saying, I'm going to change...
Well, you haven't heard of the Liberals or the Green being 10 points ahead in the polls. Shall
we move on? This news coming out yesterday, the man whose arrest led to protests outside a hotel in Epping has been found guilty of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl and a woman. First thing we should say is thoughts with that girl and that woman. That's horrendous what they've had to experience. Hadush Kabatu from Ethiopia denied all the allegations but was found guilty. The question now comes, first of all, what the reaction will be in Epping and across the community. And I think the police are saying that, look, doesn't matter what crimes are committed, the reaction on the streets is no justification. And also, what do we now do with this guy? Do we deport him immediately? Or is he our responsibility? I mean, you worked in sort of with previous Home Secretaries. What would Sajid Javid have done in this situation?
Well, you have to... There's due process around this. I'm not an asylum legal expert, so I couldn't tell you right now factually what that process is without checking it. And there will be due process to go through where an asylum application could be rejected. I do think that if you are already in a situation where you've broken the law, I think we should have a discussion about what is possible in terms of sending somebody back and not even allowing them to go through the asylum application process, or that if you do go through the process, that you're immediately rejected as a consequence of the fact that you have committed a crime. This is not just any crime. The child involved in this was 14 years old.
Yeah.
So I think it is heinous enough that you would stop and contemplate whether this is a kind of person that you would be happy to grant asylum to. And that might be a controversial thing to say, but I think there are certain things that the public will expect from you as a base level.
I agree with Sama on that. I think that, you know, of course, there should be, you know, this individual's act, which he's found guilty for, and as you said, he pleaded not guilty, and it was a child, but there was also an adult woman involved in it as well, from what I understand, speaks to some of people's concerns about asylum seekers often coming illegally, who we don't know much about. They might not have, you know, their documentation, they might have, you know, shredded or whatever and not brought with them. We don't know really much about these people. We don't know where they're coming from. And whilst, you know, clearly this guy, in the way he's acted, is completely outrageous, it plays to people's concerns about using asylum hotels. And the government is committed to ending this. And I think actually everybody should recognise we need a better way to accommodate people. But I agree. On the actual offence, the question will be, and we'll hear the verdict from the judge in due course, is whether the sexual assault offence in this reaches the sort of level, I understand, where it's, I think, a year custodial sentence in order to deport. We'll have to see on that front.
So if it's 12 months or over the
exactly,
custodial, but he did warn, didn't he, expect a prison sentence, but you're right.
I think there's a maximum of 10 years for this, but there's a range within that. But I agree. I think someone who's come here to seek asylum, who commits an offence like this and is found guilty, I think they should be returned.
We are going to debate that later, because then the complication comes: what kind of country are we returning them to? But we'll debate that later. But look, one thing I wanted to pick up on, and it's something that, you know, when you step out the country, and I've been out of the country for a few days, and you do try to avoid social media, but you do inevitably, you see from the outside what's going on. And lots of messages I've been getting that this migrant issue, and I think it's not been talked about enough of, we've got to remember the vast majority of these asylum seekers we're talking about will be Muslims. They're coming from Muslim countries. And I think a lot of people are seeing a rise in anti-Muslim hate crime. And you've
experienced
I've experienced it. I've had people DM me on Instagram talking about remigration. I've had threats to watch myself on the streets. I know very senior politicians have had violent threats. Muslim politicians have had violent threats against them. I had a woman message me only yesterday saying that in a town in the south that she'd received racial abuse as a Muslim woman and she's afraid to go out. I know people who work here have said that the friends of theirs who are Muslim, who are visibly Muslim, don't want to go to the mosque anymore. I mean, this is horrendous what's going on. I mean, mosques, we know, we have been able to corroborate it, but mosques have been attacked. Ballymena in Northern Ireland, racist attacks there. And I think we've got some images of what's been going on there as well. The thing that strikes me about this is that no one seems to be talking about it. I mean, these are anti-Muslim hate crimes, and there doesn't seem to be any politician who's standing up and actually reassuring millions of Muslims in this country that the country is behind you. And this has been going on for a number of weeks now. And that is deeply concerning.
I think there is an issue here where a lot of these kinds of offences and crimes, they go underreported and they become just part of the mainstay of the experience of the British Muslim. I think that's true for a lot of minority groups who are visibly, you know, different. And it is exacerbated by tensions around Epping hotels, and it is exacerbated...
Which, just to point out, the person convicted of the crime in that said in court they were Christian.
Right.
But because of the way people look,
yes,
there's an association. That's what you...
Which then is, in other words, that's racism.
And it's compounded by things that you are hearing in the news. It's compounded by association of radicalised Islamism and terrorism.
People like Douglas Carswell saying, you know, we need to get rid of all the Abduls across the country in a tweet. Elon Musk on the biggest platform in the UK saying it's time to remigrate. Which means people like me should go back to my ancestral home.
There's a very ugly movement on repatriation. But the question is, it's becoming more mainstream. How do you tackle that? Is it down to politicians being able to assess this and talk about it? Because we've done a lot on hate crimes.
Do you think the Labour Party should be saying more? Labour Party have got a lot of constituents. Their MPs will be Muslim constituents. Should they be saying more, do you think, at this point?
I think, sort of abuse, intimidation, whether, of anybody, whether you're Muslim or not, and in this case, don't forget, Muslim women facing both misogyny and racism at the same time, should be called out. I actually think we've got enough on the statute book in terms of tackling racism and discrimination, offences in terms of threat to life, harassment and everything.
All right.
What we need is the laws to be used effectively rather than adding another layer of laws. But you're right, in the context
voices,
of this...
though, isn't it, Caroline? That's the thing. That's what Adil is doing. He's saying that the voices from Labour, we're not hearing that. And is that because of a concern about the whole immigration issue anyway?
I think you can call out abuse, racism, harassment, but at the same time, we also need to be able to talk about immigration as well, and that's the difficulty in getting
Caroline,
the balance
we are
right.
going to have to leave it.
You're right.
We've got a very
No,
important
you're
guest
right,
to come to,
Caroline,
but we'll
but
come to you later at 8:45.
We're going to speak later
Back
on,
with us.
aren't we? Thank you very much to both of you.